Conservatives and Social Democrats, who are in negotiations to form a coalition after a national election last month, announced proposals on Tuesday to set up a €500 billion fund for infrastructure and defence spending. Addressing a press conference, leader of the Christian Democratic Union, Friedrich Merz, said that both parties would submit a motion to the Bundestag lower house of parliament, the German parliament, next week to amend the constitution. The motion aims that defence expenditure above 1% of the economic output is exempted from the debt brake. The move comes after US President Donald Trump has frozen military aid to Ukraine after a clash with President Volodymyr Zelensky last week.
That is why we want to set up a credit-financed emergency program, a special fund of €500 billion for the next 10 years, from which these necessary investments will be made. We assume that this special fund will also trigger private investment on a large scale.
Staying with Germany, the EU warns that US tariffs to Canada and Mexico threaten economic stability and risk disrupting global trade. And the bloc is also urging Washington to reverse the course. Joining us with more is DW correspondent Chiponda Chimbelu in Berlin. Hi Chiponda, now what more details can you share with us about the response to these tariffs in Europe, and how prepared is EU to respond and deal with the situation?
Thanks for having me. Well, here in Europe, there's concern about supply chains and global trade. And the European Commission said that the tariffs on Canada and Mexico, which took effect this week, threaten supply chains, investment flows, and economic stability. Now, both Canada and Mexico are economic partners of the EU. And last month, the bloc announced that it would strengthen trade relations with Mexico, where European manufacturers, especially car makers, have production facilities. Now, while the current tariffs, of course, target the US's neighbors, they are also hurting European companies. And tariffs could cost the industry, the auto industry especially, alone billions. Sometimes car parts travel across the US-Mexico border several times during production. But of course, there's also something else that Brussels is looking with concern to, and that is Trump's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum exports to the United States. Now, those are scheduled to take effect on March 12, and they will affect European exporters. Brussels is, of course, planning a response.
So in that way, what about Europe's economy? How resilient can we expect it to be?
Well, before I get into that, it is worth noting that the EU, actually, the US is the leading destination for exports, and the United States is the second biggest source of imports to the European Union. So there is a lot of harm that both economies can do to each other with tariffs. And that is why we've seen European policymakers stress that point and focus on potential negotiations. But that is, of course, something that could be changing. There is that disastrous exchange between US President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelensky in the Oval Office last Friday. And, of course, the White House's announcement this week that it would pause all military aid to Ukraine. Now, if Washington piles more pressure on the bloc with tariffs, we could very well see the EU deploy its anti-coercion instrument. Now, that is, of course, a tool with a so-called trade bazooka that would have a wide range of retaliatory measures. And those include quotas, tariffs, and foreign investment restrictions. And it was created after the first Trump administration, but it has never been used.
In other news, Israel's incoming military chief of staff,